Sometimes injustice doesn't come with sirens or viral footage. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's served with fries. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Elder Grove, a small town tucked between dusty highways and worn-down storefronts. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. The old diner on Main Street, Joanne's Griddle, was the heart of it all. Locals gathered over greasy eggs and bottomless coffee. Truckers passed through with tired eyes and heavy boots. And behind the counter stood a teenage girl, soft-spoken, diligent, and quick with a smile. Her name was Amira Collins. She was 17, a part-time waitress, a straight-A student, and someone with a secret last name that could shift tides. That Tuesday, a white cop walked in wearing entitlement like a badge heavier than the one pinned to his chest. Officer Brent Halter. Arrogant. Aggressive. Known for cracking down hard on the wrong crowd. He took his usual booth by the window. Alone. Unsmiling. Amira approached, pad in hand. "Good morning, sir. Can I start you off with?" He didn't let her finish. "I don't need sass. Just get the coffee right," he barked. She blinked. Calmly nodded. "Of course. Black, 2 sugars?" "What, you memorizing orders now?" he sneered. "Don't get cocky." The diner paused. A knife clinked against a plate. But no one said anything. Not here. Not to a cop like Brent Halter. "What's with the attitude?" he sneered. "Didn't your mommy teach you manners?" Amira blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, sir," she said and turned away with grace stitched into every step. She returned minutes later with the coffee. Set it down gently. But something in her silence irked him more than words ever could. Maybe it was the way she didn't shrink. Maybe it was the hint of pride in her posture. Whatever it was, it ignited something petty and cruel inside him. Without warning, Brent grabbed the water glass beside him, full to the brim, and poured it down Amira's front. The gasp that followed rippled through the diner like a dropped plate. "Maybe that'll cool that attitude," he muttered, leaning back, proud of himself. Amira stood frozen. Dripping. Humiliated. Her hand trembled, but her voice didn't waver. "Excuse me a moment," she said quietly, walking into the back room. She picked up her phone. Dialed one number. It rang once. "Uncle David? I need you to come down to Joanne's. Now." 10 minutes later, the doors swung open. Chief of Police David Bryant didn't wear his uniform. He didn't need to. The room stiffened with his presence. He looked at his niece. Then at Brent. "Officer Halter," he said coldly. "My office. Now." The diner watched in stunned silence as Brent followed, confused but still smug. He didn't know yet. He didn't know the girl he just soaked with water was family to the one man in town he couldn't cross. And he had no idea that within the hour, his badge would be gone. Before you go any further, kindly hit the subscribe button and follow this real-time story of power, pride, and quiet justice. Because not all battles are fought in the streets, and not all consequences come with flashing lights. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet power still speaks the loudest. Stick around till the end. This isn't just justice. This is a moment that asks all of us to look deeper. What would you have done if you were in Amira's shoes, or what would you do if this happened to your daughter? Why do you think some people only respect power when it looks like them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. No shouting, no politics. Just truth. Your voice matters here. Now back to the story. Joanne's Griddle wasn't silent, but it felt like it was. The chatter had returned in fragments, scraping forks, muttered small talk, but the weight in the room hadn't lifted. Not since Chief David Bryant walked through the door and summoned Officer Brent Halter with a tone that didn't need volume to silence an entire diner. Amira Collins remained behind the counter, her wet uniform clinging to her ribs, the scent of spilled coffee and tap water lingering on her skin. She didn't cry. Not in front of them. Not in front of the man who tried to humiliate her. She just quietly grabbed a towel from beneath the register and dabbed at her arms and collar. Her hands moved automatically, like a clock winding itself, but her mind wasn't still. She could still feel the splash. Still hear the way he said it. "That'll cool the attitude." That wasn't the first time she dealt with someone like Brent Halter. Not even close. But it was the first time it had felt this personal, this dehumanizing. And maybe that's what made it different. Not the water. Not the scene. But the fact that he looked at her and didn't see a person. Just someone to punish for existing with dignity. And yet, Amira wasn't angry. She was calm. Because she knew something Brent didn't. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a storm gathering just off the shore. In the back office, Brent sat stiffly on the edge of a metal chair, arms crossed. He still didn't understand what this was about. He thought maybe someone had overreacted. Maybe the chief just wanted to lecture him. Maybe this would blow over like every other complaint in this town. David Bryant didn't speak right away. He closed the door slowly, walked around to the desk, and sat down across from Brent. His stare was level. Measured. But underneath the stillness was a heat Brent could feel tightening the air in the room. "Let me ask you something," Chief Bryant said finally. "Do you enjoy embarrassing young girls in public?" Brent blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Don't play stupid." "I didn't lay a hand on her," Brent said, raising his voice. "She was being rude. You poured water on her in front of 24 people." Brent scoffed. "She gave me attitude." David's jaw tightened. His fingers tapped once against the table. "She's 17, he said. The child. Working part-time to help her mother. She spoke to you with nothing but respect, and you decided that wasn't enough. So you doused her in water like a dog. You think that's how we carry the badge in this town?" Brent shifted in his seat. The confidence was fading now, if only slightly. "I didn't know who she was," he muttered. David leaned forward, voice low and cold. "That's exactly the problem." Back in the kitchen, Amira sat on a crate, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't thinking about the humiliation. She wasn't even thinking about Brent anymore. She was thinking about her mother. She could already hear the way she'd say it. "Amira, you should have just let it go. Don't stir trouble. Let people like that expose themselves." Her mother meant well. Always had. But Amira knew what it was like to watch your mother shrink around uniforms. What it meant to live life holding your breath so nothing exploded. But Amira wasn't her mother. She wasn't built for shrinking. Chief Bryant stood now, walking slowly behind Brent, who sat rigid and uncertain. "You've been on this for 6 years, he said. "In that time, you've had 8 informal complaints for misconduct. 4 written reprimands. 2 suspensions. And I signed off on every single one, hoping, foolishly, that you might course correct." Brent opened his mouth to speak. David raised a hand. "I kept you on against my better judgment. But this time, it's different." "Because she's your niece?" Brent snapped. David's expression didn't change. "No. Because she's a person." There was silence. Then, the sound of a desk drawer sliding open. David pulled out a manila envelope, thick with forms. "You'll sign this now," he said, placing it on the desk. "It's your resignation. You can either hand over your badge today quietly, or I can open a formal investigation. But know this, either way, by sundown, you won't be wearing a uniform in Elder Grove again." Brent looked down at the envelope. His hands didn't move. But the smirk was gone. In the break room, Amira stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror above the sink. Her eyes were puffy but dry. She ran her fingers through her damp curls and breathed slowly through her nose. "You good, baby?" It was Joanne, the diner's owner, standing in the doorway with an apologetic look. Amira nodded. "Yeah. Just needed a minute." Joanne stepped forward, placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "I should have said something sooner," she whispered. "We all saw what happened. You know how things are in this town." Amira nodded again, but her eyes met Joanne's this time. "No," she said. "That's exactly what needs to change." By the time Officer Brent Halter stepped out of the office, his face was pale. His badge was no longer on his belt. He walked past the counter without speaking, eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. No one said a word. But they watched. Not because of a video. Not because of a trending hashtag. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens. Sometimes it walks out of a diner, quietly stripped of power, while the girl he tried to humiliate wipes her hands on a towel and gets back to work. By 6:30 that evening, the diner had emptied out. The sun hung low over Eldergrove, bleeding gold across the rusted rooftops and casting long shadows over Main Street. The world outside felt peaceful, even ordinary, but inside Amira Collins, something had shifted. She sat by the window, a quiet corner booth usually reserved for the church regulars. Her apron had been swapped for a hoodie, and the dampness from earlier was now just a faint chill in her skin. But her mind hadn't slowed. The events of the afternoon looped silently in her head like a scratched record. She kept asking herself the same question. Why didn't he even flinch when he did it? Not when he poured the water. Not when people stared. Not even when he was called into the back office. He looked amused the entire time, as if she was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It wasn't just the act that stung. It was the ease of it. And that ease came from experience. Across town, Chief David Bryant stood in his dimly lit office inside the Eldergrove Police Department. The badge on his desk, Brent Halter's, sat still under the glow of his reading lamp. David's eyes hadn't left it for 10 minutes. He thought about the look on Brent's face when he handed it over. Not anger. Not shame. Just confusion, like the rules had changed suddenly and no one had sent him the memo. David leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that felt years old. He had risen through the ranks playing every game by the book. Took the beat no one wanted. Worked twice as hard. Smiled twice as much. Always calm. Always measured. Because in a town like Eldergrove, black men didn't get promoted for being right. They got promoted for being quiet and reliable. Until he couldn't be quiet anymore. And now, years later, his own niece had been dragged into the fire. He reached for the phone. Back at home, Amira was curled up on the couch, legs tucked under a blanket, a bowl of reheated rice untouched on the table. Her mother, Nicole Collins, stood in the kitchen folding laundry, occasionally glancing at her daughter with worry that wore like a second skin. "You're sure you're okay?" she asked for the third time. Amira nodded, eyes still fixed out the window. "Uncle David took care of it." "I know, but—" Nicole paused, folding a dish towel. "This town doesn't forget easily. He embarrassed you in front of everyone. That'll linger." Amira finally looked at her. "You think I shouldn't have called him?" Nicole hesitated. Not because she doubted her daughter, but because she knew how Eldergrove worked. "I think you did what felt right," she said softly. "But right doesn't always mean safe." There was silence for a moment. Amira looked down at her hands, still slightly red from scrubbing dishes after the shift ended. "Why do you never tell anyone who Uncle David is?" Nicole asked gently. "You could walk into that diner with your head high. People would treat you differently." Amira smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I don't." Nicole raised a brow. Amira shrugged. "I don't want respect because someone's afraid of who I'm related to. I want to earn it." Nicole let out a soft chuckle, walked over, and kissed the top of her head. "You're your father's child, through and through," she whispered. The name stung for a moment. Not in pain, but in reverence. Amira had been young when he passed. A military man, calm and principled, who had once told her, "Real power doesn't yell. It just moves." And today, she finally understood what he meant. Meanwhile, Chief Bryant wasn't done for the night. He stood in the small archives room of the department, boxes stacked, old reports lined up by date. He reached for a folder marked 2019, Internal Incidents, and pulled out a thin file with Brent Halter's name on the front. David hadn't read it in years. But now that Brent was no longer shielded by the badge, he wanted to see the full picture again. Inside, an old complaint from a young Hispanic boy who had been stopped outside a gas station and thrown to the ground for loitering. No body cam. No witness testimony. Case dismissed. David stared at the paper, lips pressed into a hard line. Brent had been a problem for a long time. But no one wanted to deal with the hassle. Eldergrove preferred its problems tucked neatly under rugs, especially when the uniform was white and the victim was not. But that was over now. And he was going to make sure it stayed that way. The next morning, Amira walked into Eldergrove High with her chin lifted but her gut uneasy. She was early, always was, but even from the lockers to the left of the main stairwell, she could feel it, eyes. Not many. Not obvious. Just enough to make the air feel heavy. She passed two boys whispering by the water fountain. One of them nodded toward her and smirked. She caught the tail end of it. Cop girl. So it had started. Not protest. Not public outrage. Just whispers. Just the quiet kind of backlash. Her best friend, Jasmine Lynn, caught up with her at her locker. "You okay?" she asked, breathless. "I heard about what happened. My uncle was at the diner. He said the whole place froze." Amira sighed. It was what it was. Jasmine leaned against the locker next to hers. "So, what happens now?" Amira didn't answer right away. Because she didn't know. The water had dried. The badge had been stripped. But something told her this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. Brent Halter sat alone in his truck, parked in the back lot of Tony's Auto Supply, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight the leather groaned beneath his hands. He hadn't turned the engine on. He hadn't even moved since storming out of the chief's office the day before. His badge was gone. Just like that. No hearing. No union rep. Just a desk, a folder, and a man who spoke to him like he was trash. And all over some teenage waitress with an attitude. He snorted bitterly and stared through the windshield, eyes narrowed at the cracked brick wall in front of him. She had something to do with the chief. He could feel it now, playing the moment over in his head. The way she didn't flinch. The way the chief walked in 10 minutes later and didn't even ask for details. This wasn't about water. This was about power. And Brent? He'd just been outplayed. Back at the station, tension hummed like static behind every door. The officers were quieter than usual. Conversations ended abruptly when Chief Bryant walked through the bullpen. Not because they disagreed with what he did. Not exactly. But because in Elder Grove, people didn't rock the boat, especially not one of their own. Chief Bryant was no fool. He saw the glances. The clipped nods. The way some reports suddenly took longer to file. And yet, not one of them said it aloud. Because deep down, they knew Brent Halter had crossed a line. Maybe not the first time. Definitely not the only time. But this time? He poured water on a girl. A teenager. A child. In public. And the girl wasn't just anyone. She was family. Still, lines were being drawn. Subtle, careful ones. Elder Grove didn't do drama in the open. No protests. No picket signs. Just distance. Just whispers in the break room and silent resentment tucked behind tired smiles. Amira walked the hallways of Elder Grove High with her headphones in, music off, just so she could block out the world. But still hear it. People didn't talk to her the same way anymore. Teachers paused when calling her name. Some students avoided eye contact altogether. And others? They wanted stories. Did he really dump it on you? Was your uncle, like, super mad? You got him fired, huh? She'd answer with a shrug or a half smile. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be the girl who brought down a cop. She just wanted to work her shifts, do her homework, and maybe, just maybe, get into Columbia next year like she dreamed since she was 13. But you can't stay invisible after someone tries to drown your dignity in public. Especially not when you stood tall afterward. Chief Bryant met with the mayor that afternoon. It wasn't a formal hearing. More like a drop-by that had clearly been planned days in advance. Mayor Gene Wallace was a balding man with a soft handshake and a habit of smiling too much. He offered coffee, small talk, and then leaned back in his chair with a sigh that meant trouble. "You know the Halters have been here for 3 generations, right?" he asked. "I'm aware," David said calmly. "And Brent's father was a good officer. Died on duty. I was at the funeral." Mayor Wallace scratched his chin. "I'm just saying, maybe it could have been handled with a warning instead of a resignation demand." David stared for a long moment. "If he'd dumped water on your granddaughter in a room full of people, would you have asked for a warning?" The mayor blinked. Didn't answer. David leaned forward slightly. "This department can't keep making exceptions based on lineage. Not anymore. Not under me." And that was that. At least for now. That night, Amira found herself back at the diner, not working, just sitting at booth 3, sipping a milkshake she didn't finish. Joanne slid into the seat across from her, apron still tied. "You okay, sugar?" Amira nodded. "Yeah. Just tired." Joanne hesitated. You know, when I was your age, I kept my head down too. Worked, smiled, kept my voice soft. Didn't want to cause ripples. Amira looked up. But ripples happen anyway, Joanne continued. Even when you do everything right. Amira gave a small smile. Feels more like a storm than a ripple. Storms are good, Joanne said gently. They clean things. Amira didn't reply. But for the first time all week, she didn't feel quite so alone. On the outskirts of town, Brent wasn't done sulking. He was making calls. Old friends. A cousin who worked in county law. A retired sergeant who still played poker with some of the department brass. He wasn't looking for his badge back. He was looking for dirt. Because if Elder Grove was going to turn on him, then he'd make damn sure someone else fell too. And if that meant reminding Chief Bryant that nobody climbs high without stepping on bones, then so be it. The town of Elder Grove had always preferred its truths with edges sanded down. No drama. No exposure. Just enough truth to keep the lights on, and enough silence to keep the machine moving. But now, Brent Halter was clawing through that silence, and in Elder Grove, people who dug too deep often found ghosts they weren't ready to face. He sat at his kitchen table in a white undershirt, 3 days stubble hugging his jaw, and folders sprawled in front of him like a crime board. The overhead bulb flickered. The coffee was cold. The bitterness wasn't. Brent had spent the last 48 hours making calls, flipping through old departmental rosters, and talking to people he hadn't spoken to in years. The ones who still saw him as the Halter boy, and not the disgraced officer who got taken down by a 17-year-old girl and her high-ranking uncle. What he wanted wasn't justice. It was leverage. He knew Chief David Bryant had risen fast. Too fast, some had whispered. And Brent was betting everything on the idea that someone, somewhere, had once let him skip a step. He reached for a thin file, an old disciplinary log from 15 years ago. A former admin clerk had slipped it to him over a beer and a whispered, "Don't say I gave you this." Brent flipped the cover open with shaking fingers. Inside were incident reports. Most routine. But one report caught his attention. A field review from 2009. A patrol that ended with David Bryant calling off backup during a drug sweep. There had been no casualties. No arrests. But the note in the margin, scribbled by the now-deceased Chief Russell Mays, read, "Bryant chose discretion over procedure. Flag for review if it happens again." Brent's mouth curled. A flag. Not a fireable offense. But a crack. And cracks could be widened. Especially in a town like Elder Grove. At Elder Grove High, Amira Collins sat in room 214, the last row by the window, hands clasped on her desk as the final bell rang and students filed out. She didn't move. She hadn't heard half the lecture. Her mind was elsewhere. It had been 4 days since Brent was dismissed, but the air at school still buzzed with invisible tension. Some kids treated her like a celebrity. Others acted like she carried a disease. She didn't belong to either camp. She just wanted the day to end. "Miss Collins," a voice called gently. Amira looked up. Mr. Hollis, her American government teacher, was erasing the board but watching her from the corner of his eye. "Can I keep you a moment?" Amira nodded and stood slowly. She approached his desk, expecting a comment about her slipping participation or missing last week's quiz. Instead, he reached into his drawer and pulled out an old yearbook, 2004. Brown leather cover, slightly frayed at the corners. "I wasn't sure if you knew," he said, placing it in front of her and flipping to a marked page. Amira frowned. "Knew what?" Hollis turned the book around. There, on the page marked Senior Class Superlatives, was a black and white photo of a tall young man with a confident smile and eyes that looked hauntingly like her own. Underneath, the caption read, "Most likely to lead a revolution, Thomas T.J. Collins." Amira's breath hitched. Her father. She had seen photos, of course. But this was different. This was him in motion. Not the military officer in framed pictures. But a teenager. A student. A fire starter. "He was my student," Hollis said quietly. "One of the smartest, most unshakable kids I've ever taught. He questioned everything. Wrote essays that made the school board sweat." Amira ran her fingers over the page. "He didn't talk much about high school," she whispered. He wouldn't have. He carried weight even back then. Got suspended once for organizing a sit-in when the school tried to cut Black History Month programs. Spoke at town meetings before he could vote. And after September 11th, he signed up for the army without telling anyone. Said, if we want to fix this world, we have to step into the fire, not run from it. Amira didn't know whether to cry or smile. Instead, she closed the book slowly. Thank you, she said, voice low. No, Hollis replied, locking eyes with her. Thank you, for reminding this town who raised you. Meanwhile, inside the police department, Chief Bryant stood at the window of his office, arms folded. Behind him, a soft knock broke the silence. It was Captain Dorsey, his second in command. She stepped in without waiting for an invitation. You should know, Brent's been talking to former brass. Digging. David didn't flinch. Let him. Dorsey raised a brow. You don't think he's got something? He doesn't need something, David replied. He just needs enough of a shadow to make people squint. Dorsey sat across from him. And if the mayor squints too hard? David turned from the window and walked to his desk. Then let him. I didn't become chief to play golf with bigots and look the other way while my officers pour water on girls like my niece. Dorsey nodded slowly. But her eyes lingered on the folder on David's desk, one she recognized from her early years in internal affairs. Just be careful, she said softly. This town doesn't throw parades for clean hands. It buries them. At home that night, Amira placed the yearbook next to her bed, fingers tracing her father's name one more time before turning off the light. She didn't feel stronger. She felt clear. And for the first time in days, the weight on her chest wasn't from humiliation. It was legacy. And legacy didn't flinch in the face of power. Across town, Brent stared at his phone. His cousin had just texted him something cryptic. Check the 2009 sweep. Quiet file. Chief Mava left some pieces behind. Brent grinned in the dark. He didn't know what he was going to do with it yet. But he knew one thing. If David Bryant was standing on a platform built by silence, Brent would be the one to knock out the first brick. By Monday morning, the streets of Elder Grove buzzed with the same routines, coffee shops opening at dawn, buses hissing to stops, and neighbors greeting one another with the polite stiffness small towns are known for. But beneath it all, a subtle tension simmered. The kind you couldn't see. The kind you felt. And in the center of that quiet shift was a name, Chief David Bryant. It didn't start with a scandal. It didn't need to. It started with a question, whispered carefully at the barbershop or murmured in the hardware store checkout line. Did you hear about that thing back in '09? Someone said he covered up a sweep that went sideways. Don't know if it's true, but where there's smoke. The words never landed hard. But they lingered, like cigarette smoke on an old coat, subtle, but impossible to ignore. And Brent Halter had lit the match. In a corner booth at Baxter's Tavern, Brent sat with two former officers, Ronnie Steele and Kirk Matson, both of them gray-haired, retired, and half-drunk before noon. Look, I'm not saying Bryant's a bad guy, Ronnie muttered, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass, but back in the day, he wasn't the squeaky clean knight people think he is. Kirk nodded. Hell, I remember that sweep. Lot of noise, and then, nothing. We were told to keep our heads down. Bryant called it strategic discretion. Brent leaned in. And you just accepted that? Ronnie shrugged. What were we gonna do? File a report? He had Mays backing him then. And Mays didn't want scandals. He wanted stability. Brent smirked. Yeah, he said slowly. Stability's just another word for silence. He didn't need proof. He just needed a narrative. And now he had one. At Elder Grove High, Amira moved through the hallways like a ghost in plain sight. People didn't avoid her as much as they watched her. They weren't hostile. But they weren't warm either. Some students smiled too much when she walked by, others didn't meet her eyes at all. It was like being in the center of a slow-brewing storm, where everyone waited to see if thunder would come. She sat alone at lunch, pushing mashed potatoes around her tray when Mr. Kane, the guidance counselor, approached. Mind if I join you? Amira gave a small nod. He sat down, adjusting his tie awkwardly. I heard you've been having a tough couple of weeks. Amira tilted her head. I'm doing fine. I believe you, he said, a little too quickly. But word gets around. And it's come to my attention that a few of your teachers have expressed concerns about distractions. Amira blinked. Distractions? Falling grades. Missed assignments. Behavioral changes. I haven't missed anything. I'm just relaying what I've been told. Amira stared at him for a long beat, then leaned in slightly. Would they be concerned if my uncle wasn't the chief of police? Mr. Kane opened his mouth, then closed it. I'm here to support you, he said finally. But optics matter. Just stay focused, okay? Amira stood. I am focused, she said softly. Just not on keeping people comfortable. She walked away, her chest tight. Not with shame. With clarity. At the police department, Chief Bryant sat in his office, staring at a photograph on the wall, a younger version of himself, in uniform, shaking hands with Chief Mays after a successful drug sweep in 2009. It was the same year everything had changed. He remembered that night like it was yesterday. They'd been tipped off about a possible stash house near the county line, young kids caught up in something bigger than they understood. But when they got there, it was a mess. One of the rookies panicked. Guns were drawn. A child was nearly injured in the chaos. And David had made a call. No arrests. No charges. No press. He'd written it off as strategic restraint, convinced that turning it into a news story would only ruin lives unnecessarily. He still believed that. But now, that choice had a shadow. And Brent was dragging that shadow into the light. That evening, Amira returned home to find her uncle's car in the driveway. She hesitated at the door, uncertain. The last few days had passed with only brief check-ins and quiet nods. She knew he was dealing with the aftermath, Brent's exit, the politics, the rumors. But something about tonight felt different. She stepped inside and found him in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove like it was the most natural thing in the world. Uncle David? She asked, setting her backpack down. He turned, offering a tired smile. Hope you're hungry. Chicken stew. She nodded and sat at the table. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he sighed and placed a bowl in front of her. There's something I want you to hear, he said, sitting across from her. Amira looked up. I know things feel strange right now. Kids at school, teachers, even in the department. You're seeing a side of this town most people pretend doesn't exist. Amira didn't interrupt. Just listened. I've spent most of my career playing chess in rooms where the rules were made by men who never wanted me at the table. And sometimes, to stay in the game, I've made compromises I don't talk about. He paused. In 2009, I walked away from a raid that could have gone public. Could have ruined kids' lives, black kids. Boys who didn't even know the full extent of what they were caught in. I made a judgment call. Not because I was protecting crime, but because I didn't want to watch another mother bury a son just to satisfy a quota. Amira's chest ached. She didn't see weakness in his voice. She saw weariness. The kind you earn. But people like Brent, he continued, they don't care about nuance. They don't care about what was spared. Only what can be twisted. Amira reached across the table and placed her hand on his. You don't have to explain, she whispered. I know who you are. David smiled. But in his eyes, there was something heavy, the knowledge that the truth wasn't always enough. That even clean hands could be bloodied by rumors. That night, Brent sat in the dark with a laptop open. He had uploaded the report. Not to a blog. Not to a paper. But to an anonymous tip box on a conservative county newsletter with just enough reach to spread whispers in the right rooms. He didn't care if it made headlines. He just needed doubt. Doubt had a way of corroding trust faster than fire. And if David Bryan had built his leadership on integrity, then Brent was going to make the town ask questions, whether or not they ever got answers. The morning the article dropped, Chief David Bryant was already 2 hours into paperwork when his desk phone buzzed. He didn't check the caller ID. Didn't need to. Bryant, he answered flatly. There was a pause on the other end. You're going to want to read this before your 10 a.m. meeting. The voice belonged to Captain Dorsey. David frowned, placed the receiver down, and turned toward the department's second-hand desktop. 3 clicks later, the page loaded. eldergrovewatch.net. 2009 cover-up? Questions arise around police chief's past raid. He read the headline twice. The body of the article wasn't dramatic. In fact, it was too casual, just bullet points and leading language. It never made outright accusations. Instead, it suggested misconduct. That a drug raid under then-Lieutenant Bryant had been intentionally buried. That the town deserved transparency from those in power. It quoted no one, cited no sources, and signed off under the pseudonym, A Concerned Citizen. But it had teeth, because it planted seeds, the kind that grow in the dark. Across town at Elder Grove High, Amira felt the shift before she even reached homeroom. It wasn't the usual stares or whispers. It was subtler now. People were careful. Like she was radioactive, and no one wanted to get too close. Even Jasmine, her best friend, had offered only a stiff wave that morning. Amira sat at her desk and pulled out her notebook, determined to act normal. But during second period, it hit. She opened her locker between classes and found a folded piece of paper sitting neatly on top of her textbooks. No name. No handwriting she recognized. She unfolded it. Your uncle's not as clean as you think. Check the news, princess. No threats. Just venom. She crumpled it and stuffed it into her hoodie pocket. But the sting settled deep. Back at the precinct, Chief Bryant stood in the conference room with Mayor Wallace and 2 members of the town oversight committee. The meeting wasn't public. It wasn't even formally documented. Just a friendly check-in. We're not accusing you of anything, David, Mayor Wallace began, his smile stretched thin. But you understand, when the public sees something like this, we have to assess the optics. David said nothing. Just watched the mayor sip from his coffee like they were catching up over pancakes. Frankly, one of the committee members added, it's not the article itself. It's the fact that it's circulating at all. People are asking questions. David's voice was calm when it came. But there was steel beneath it. Questions are fine, he said. But if this town starts deciding a man's character based on anonymous blog posts, then I think the rot runs deeper than I thought. Mayor Wallace raised his hands. We're not saying you've done anything wrong. We're just suggesting that you be prepared. If this gains traction. Traction. That was always the game in Elder Grove. Keep things tidy, image first. It didn't matter what actually happened. What mattered was how clean it looked. David stood. If anyone would like to speak with me about the 2009 operation, my door is open. I'll even bring the files myself. But I won't apologize for protecting children from a system that chews them up. The room fell silent. Mayor Wallace cleared his throat. We'll be in touch. Amira didn't tell anyone about the note. She didn't need to. By lunch, she'd already heard 2 juniors whispering about the article at the vending machines. Someone in her science class asked her, loudly, if it was true her uncle let drug dealers walk. And worst of all, Jasmine hadn't said a word. By the time the last bell rang, Amira's chest felt heavy with something she couldn't name, betrayal, maybe. Or maybe just disappointment. In people. In how fast loyalty melted under pressure. She found Jasmine waiting by the front steps. Hands in her pockets. Eyes unsure. I heard about the article, Jasmine said quietly. Yeah, Amira replied, not stopping. I didn't write the note, if that's what you think. I didn't ask. Jasmine followed her down the stairs. Why didn't you tell me it was getting this bad? Amira turned, eyes sharp. Maybe because every time I open my mouth lately, people either stare at me or wait to use my words against me. And I thought you, out of everyone. Jasmine's face flushed. I'm trying, Amira. It's just, people are saying a lot. Teachers. Parents. And I didn't want to drag your name into things more. You're my best friend, Amira said. Dragging my name into things is kind of the job. The silence stretched. Then Amira walked away, leaving Jasmine rooted to the sidewalk. That night, Chief Bryant sat in his home office, the 2009 file spread across his desk. He flipped through the pages, rereading witness statements, timeline notes, his own handwritten decision log. It was all there. But still, people didn't need lies. They just needed doubt. He closed the folder and leaned back. His mind drifted, Not to Brent Halter, but to the boy from the raid. Marcus Wynn. 14 at the time. Caught in the wrong place. The stash house wasn't his. The weapon found was linked to someone else. But Marcus would have been charged as an adult if the arrest had gone through. David had let him walk. He'd followed the boy's life from a distance. Last he checked, Marcus had gotten a welding certificate. Working in Michigan now. Sending money back to his mother. A quiet success story. One no newspaper ever printed. But real. And now that decision was the weapon Brent was trying to twist. Elsewhere, Brent sat in his car outside the department, watching the building glow dimly under street lamps. He didn't go inside. He just watched. He wanted to see the cracks form. He wanted to see the man who stripped him of his badge unravel in slow motion. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't predict, was that David Bryant wasn't unraveling. He was remembering why he put the uniform on in the first place. And Amira? She was just beginning to understand what it truly meant to carry a name. Wednesday mornings were always slow at Joanne's Griddle, and Amira was grateful for that. She needed silence, needed distance from the chatter and the side eyes at school. The place smelled like syrup and strong coffee, and the hum of the kitchen was oddly soothing. She was wiping down table 4 when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up. Jasmine. The two girls locked eyes for a second too long. Amira considered turning her back, just walking away and letting Joanne handle it. But she didn't. She stood still, cloth in hand, watching her friend walk slowly toward her. Jasmine stopped a few feet away. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. Amira didn't answer. Jasmine swallowed. I should have said something. When people started talking, I should have stood next to you, not just around you. You think? Amira said, folding her arms. I was scared, Jasmine said. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Of becoming part of it. But you stood there, soaked in water, in front of a full diner, and still walked with your head up. And she shook her head, voice cracking, I hid behind whispers. Amira looked away, then back. Do you know what's worse than being humiliated? She asked. Being humiliated and then realizing you're alone in it. That your closest people suddenly think you're inconvenient. Jasmine's eyes welled. I don't want to be one of those people, she said. Not anymore. I don't care what rumors are flying or what people say about your uncle. He's a good man. And you didn't just stand up for yourself. You made the whole town stop and think. A long silence passed between them. Then Amira nodded once and stepped forward. Then don't just apologize, she said gently. Stand next to me. Loudly. Jasmine let out a soft laugh through her tears and hugged her friend tightly. For the first time in days, Amira allowed herself to feel it, relief. Not because everything was okay, but because some people still knew how to return home. At the Elder Grove Police Department, Chief David Bryant sat in his office, staring at a fresh envelope someone had slipped under his door. No name. Just his title, typed in bold letters. Inside, a single page. You did the right thing in '09. You saved my boy. I never said thank you because I didn't know how. But I know you're under fire now. And I need you to know this town needs you. LW. David read the letter again. Then a third time. He didn't have to guess. He remembered Linda Wynn. Mother of Marcus. She'd been too stunned to speak the day he let her son walk away. Just cried into his coat and whispered, you didn't have to do that. He hadn't done it for thanks. But now, in a moment when the walls were pressing in, this quiet note was oxygen. Meanwhile, Brent wasn't done. The article hadn't hit as hard as he hoped. People whispered sure. But David Bryant wasn't cracking. And Amira wasn't fading from the spotlight. If anything, the town seemed unsettled, not convinced. So Brent made a decision. One final move. Something public. He called in a favor from Jake Wilson, an old friend who worked at a regional news station in the next county. Jake owed him. Years ago, Brent had helped cover a drunk and disorderly report that would have ended Jake's broadcast career. Brent sat across from him now in a cheap diner booth. I'm not giving you anything fabricated, Brent said, sliding a thin folder across the table. But this is real. A police operation that was buried. Kids involved. No arrests. Chief Bryant made the call, and it never got reported. Jake flipped through the documents. There's no victim, he said. No complaint. There's silence, Brent argued. That's the story. A town where silence protects some and buries others. Jake raised an eyebrow. And you're doing this out of moral concern? Brent leaned forward. I'm doing it because people like Bryant get to rewrite history. And I'm tired of being the one carrying the weight of someone else's script. Jake hesitated, then nodded. Give me 24 hours. Brent left the booth smiling for the first time in days. He didn't need a scandal. He just needed a primetime audience. At home, Amira sat with her mother at the kitchen table. Dinner untouched. Nicole stirred her tea, silent for a long time before saying, I heard a news van from Channel 8 was seen in town. Amira looked up. Nicole sighed. They're not here for pie and coffee. What happens if they put it on the air? Amira asked. Nicole didn't answer. But her eyes said it all. Truth didn't always win the loudest battle. Sometimes it just had to survive it. That night, Chief Bryant stood in his backyard, the cool night wind rustling the trees. He didn't feel angry. He felt ready. Brent Halter had underestimated one thing. David Bryant wasn't ashamed of his past. He had made mistakes, but the ones he didn't make? He stood by them. He stood by every young boy he protected, every silent decision that spared a future. So when the phone buzzed and Captain Dorsey's voice came through, low, firm, urgent, he didn't flinch. They're going public. A segment tomorrow night. The newsletter leak is getting airtime. David didn't blink. Let them air it, he said. What? Let them say what they want, he said again. But make sure every officer who ever served with me shows up here tomorrow morning. In uniform. If this town wants a reckoning, then I'll give them one. But on my terms. At exactly 7 p.m., the evening news rolled out like any other, upbeat music, polished anchors, and a forecast nobody really trusted. But at 7:12, the mood shifted. The station logo gave way to a segment titled, Silent Decisions. Questions surround Elder Grove's police chief. Inside the living rooms and kitchens of Elder Grove, families leaned in. Forks paused midair. TV remotes froze in laps. And the voiceover began. Tonight, we take a closer look at a buried police operation from 2009, one that, until now, never made the news. At the center of it, Elder Grove's current chief of police, David Bryant. The screen cut to Brent Halter, sitting smugly in a brown blazer he rarely wore, his jaw clean-shaven, his voice rehearsed. All I'm saying is, when people in power make calls in the dark, we deserve to ask why. There was no transparency. Just silence. No direct accusations. No slander. Just suspicion, neatly packaged and aired for thousands to see. They even played a grainy scan of a declassified 2009 field log, no names, no faces, but enough for Elder Grove residents to squint and murmur. The final line hit hardest. Chief Bryant declined to appear on camera, but issued a short written statement affirming that discretion is not deceit, and protecting lives sometimes means refusing to sacrifice them for optics. Then the screen faded to commercial. And just like that, a seed of doubt was broadcast across county lines. The next morning, the Elder Grove Police Department was unusually full. Uniforms. Suits. Former officers. Secretaries. Even a few community volunteers. Some came out of curiosity. Others from loyalty. But all were summoned by a quiet order from the chief himself. David Bryant entered the briefing room exactly at 8 a.m. No coffee in hand. No folder. Just presence. The room went still. He didn't raise his voice. I won't be long, he began. A dozen eyes fixed on him. Some guarded. Some open. A few unreadable. You've all seen the news. You've heard the whispers. And maybe some of you are wondering if it's true, if I did something wrong in 2009. If I hid something. He let the silence breathe. I didn't, he said, his tone clear. I made a choice. I walked into a raid with 2 rookies and a tip that turned out to be half right. Inside that house were 3 scared boys, one of them armed. I saw panic in their eyes. The kind that makes bad things happen fast. His gaze swept the room. If I'd followed protocol, we would have had a bloodbath. And Eldergrove would have buried 3 teenagers it barely knew. I made the call to stand down. To walk them out. To keep the press away. And if that costs me this job, so be it. But I will not apologize for choosing life over headlines. The room stayed still, but the air was different now. Sure. He nodded once. That's all. And walked out. No applause. No condemnation. Just the quiet understanding that some truths are best delivered face to face. That same afternoon, Eldergrove High School held its annual Civic Voices Assembly, a sleepy event where students were encouraged to discuss social issues in a formal forum. It was never well attended. Until now. Word had spread. Amira Collins was going to speak. The auditorium filled quickly. Students, teachers, a few parents, even a local reporter quietly seated in the back. Amira stood backstage, palms sweating, her notes trembling in her hands. Jasmine squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to prove anything, she whispered. I'm not trying to, Amira replied, voice calm. I'm just done letting other people narrate my life. When her name was called, the room hushed. She stepped to the podium, looked out at a sea of waiting faces and paused. Not to collect herself, but to let the silence belong to her, just this once. My name is Amira Collins, she began. I'm 17. A waitress. A student. A daughter. A niece. The pause. And recently, someone poured a glass of water on me because I made him uncomfortable. Guess. Amira's eyes didn't waver. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I made a call. And in the days since, people have debated not just what happened, but who I am allowed to be. She lifted her chin. I've heard the rumors. That I'm entitled. That my family has power. That my uncle used his position to protect me. But let me be very clear, power didn't walk into that diner that day. Dignity did. And it didn't pour water on anyone. Murmurs rippled through the room. I don't speak today to defend myself. Or my uncle. I speak because I've learned something. Silence isn't safety. It's just someone else's comfort. And I'm tired of comforting people who don't see me as fully human. A few claps scattered. I'm not a symbol. I'm not a scandal. I'm a girl who showed up, did her job, and got drenched for not shrinking. Now the applause was building, raw, uncoordinated, but real. And to anyone watching this town decide who's worth protecting, let me remind you, justice doesn't always come with flashing lights. Sometimes it walks into school the next day, head high, still soaking wet, but undefeated. She stepped back, and the auditorium erupted. At home that night, David watched the clip on his phone. Someone had recorded it, shaky and slightly muffled, but every word intact. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. But his heart swelled in a way it hadn't in years. Not because the town was cheering, but because his niece had become the kind of leader he'd once dreamed of being. Elsewhere, Brent Halter watched the same clip on his laptop. And for the first time since he'd started this war, he closed the screen without a word. No smirk. No strategy. Just silence. And the growing realization that no matter how loud his accusations got, some voices just couldn't be drowned. Brent Halter's phone rang twice before he picked up, still half asleep, crusted eyes squinting in the gray light of morning. Brent Halter? A voice asked flatly. Speaking. This is Elaine Porter from Internal Affairs, 6th District Review Board. We'd like to speak with you today regarding the statements you gave to the press concerning Chief David Bryant. You're being requested, not invited. 2 p.m. Don't be late. Before Brent could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone for a long second, dread beginning to sink in. Not fear. Panic's cousin. The realization that his name was finally entering the kind of room that didn't take kindly to half-truths and ego. The smell of stale coffee still clung to his couch cushions. A newscast murmured in the background. Something about school board elections and local heroes. The screen cut to a replay of Amira Collins' speech. Brent reached for the remote, but his hand froze midway. He watched her. Every word. Every moment. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down, some part of him, maybe the last shred of decency, knew he had lost. Not just the battle. The moral ground. And no rumor, blog post, or interview could fix that. At the Elder Grove Police Department, tension buzzed like electricity in the walls. Chief Bryant sat in the back of the department's largest conference room, flanked by senior officers and union reps. Across from them sat the Police Oversight Committee, a half-dozen faces that looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, but now held the fate of a man in their hands. The public wasn't invited. There were no cameras. But every eye in the room knew this wasn't just about policy. It was about power. Mayor Wallace sat at the far end of the table, fingers steepled. "We're not here to retry a decade-old decision," he began. "We're here because this department has been under scrutiny, and we need to determine if the current leadership still carries the confidence of this institution." David said nothing. He didn't need to. Captain Dorsey spoke instead. "Sir, if I may?" she asked the room. The mayor nodded. Dorsey stood, crisp uniform creased to perfection, notes in hand she didn't bother looking at. "I've worked under 4 chiefs in my 21 years, she said. None of them matched Chief Bryant in integrity. He doesn't lead by fear. He leads by example. And when he made that call in 2009, he saved lives, not just bodies, but futures." She looked across the table. "If you're looking for someone who will bend to public pressure at the expense of justice, you're in the wrong room." Then she sat back down. The silence was heavy. Then Officer Cruz, a white officer with a reputation for fairness, spoke up. "Every officer here knows Brent Halter crossed lines long before he lost that badge. The only mistake the chief made was giving him too many chances." A murmur of agreement followed. The vote was taken. Unanimous. Chief Bryant would remain. Meanwhile, across town, Amira sat in the guidance office. This time, not in trouble. This time, she was waiting. Mr. Kane walked in with a smile that looked unsure. "We got a call this morning," he said. "From the district superintendent's office." Amira blinked. "About what?" "Well, it seems your speech was more than just a hit on social media," he said. "There's a regional youth civic forum being hosted in Atlanta next month. They're inviting 10 students from around the state to speak. One of them is you." Amira's mouth parted slightly. "I didn't apply." "You didn't need to," he said. "They saw the video. They want your voice in the room." She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process the idea of standing before policymakers, student leaders, and journalists. All because she told the truth in front of her classmates. "I don't have a speech," she said quietly. Mr. Kane smiled. "That's all right. You already have a voice. They just want you to use it." Back at the precinct, David returned to his office. Alone again. He sat down slowly, exhaled, and for the first time in weeks, felt the full weight lift. No badge had ever been heavier than the silence he'd carried for years. He looked toward the framed photo on the shelf. His brother, Amira's father, standing in uniform beside a younger version of himself. "I hope you saw her," he whispered. "I hope you see what she's becoming." A knock on the door broke the moment. It was Dorsey. "Press is asking if you'll make a statement." David shook his head gently. "No cameras." "Then what should I tell them?" He thought for a beat. "Tell them Elder Grove's fine. And that the girl they tried to silence has already said everything worth hearing." Later that evening, Amira sat at the diner again, booth 4, a milkshake in front of her, half melted. Jasmine slid into the seat across from her without asking. "I saw the invite letter," she said. "You're going to Atlanta?" "Looks like it," Amira said with a smile. "Guess I have to buy something that doesn't smell like French fries." Jasmine chuckled. Then her tone grew serious. "Do you think people will listen?" Amira stirred her straw, watching the swirl. "I don't know," she said. "But I think some of them already are." They sat in silence for a while, not needing to fill the air with anything else. Outside, the street lamps flickered on. Inside, for the first time in a long while, peace settled without fear. The conference hall in Atlanta was everything Amira Collins didn't expect. Glass ceilings, wide marble floors, and a stage framed with velvet drapes and golden uplights. She stood in the wings, nerves dancing up her spine as the moderator called her name. Representing Elder Grove, Georgia. Miss Amira Collins. The applause was polite at first. Then louder. Then standing. She didn't move at first. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood now, the voice that once trembled in a diner, in a hallway, in a classroom, had become something bigger. She stepped up to the mic. One breath in. And spoke. When people talk about justice, they picture big moments. Courtroom verdicts, marches, headlines. But sometimes justice is quiet. It walks into a room soaking wet and doesn't explain itself. The audience leaned in. I was humiliated in public by a man who thought power made him untouchable. He poured water on me because I didn't shrink for him. He thought silence would follow. That I'd go home. Swallow it. Move on. Her voice didn't shake. But silence isn't safety. It's just someone else's comfort. Heads nodded. In my hometown, justice didn't show up with cameras. It showed up wearing a police badge, one that didn't protect the powerful but stood by the powerless. My uncle didn't make speeches. He didn't call the news. He just walked in and reminded a man that respect is not optional. Not in his town. Not on his watch. The room was still. And when the dust settled, when the whispers faded, I realized something. Dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to drown. By the time she left the stage, 3 people from national youth programs had slipped her cards. A congresswoman's aide had asked to stay in touch. Her face would appear in a quiet write-up 2 days later under the headline, "The Girl Who Dared to Stand Dry." But the shock came after. When she returned to Elder Grove that Sunday morning, walking into the diner with her overnight bag still in hand, Joanne met her at the door with tears in her eyes. "He's gone," she whispered. Amira froze. "What?" Joanne pulled her aside, voice low. "Brent. He left town. Packed up his truck overnight. Left a letter with Mayor Wallace. No return address. Just a badge in a brown envelope and a note." She handed it to Amira, folded and creased. In stiff handwriting it read, "You were right. She wasn't the problem. I was. Tell her I didn't realize until too late that dignity can't be washed off." Badge enclosed. The letter wasn't signed, but the message was louder than any scandal. Chief Bryant sat at his desk reading the note slowly. He didn't smile. Didn't scoff. He placed the badge down gently, ran his fingers over it, and whispered, "Finally." Not because Brent's badge mattered, but because what he finally admitted did. That night, the Collins home was filled with quiet celebration. Nicole made chicken stew. Jasmine brought a cake. Even Captain Dorsey stopped by with a bouquet of congratulatory sunflowers. Amira stepped out to the back porch as the sun set, her Atlanta speech notes still folded in her pocket. Her uncle joined her with 2 mugs of tea, handing her one. "You did more than speak," he said. "You taught this town something we've waited generations for them to learn." She looked at him. "What's that?" "That dignity," he said softly, "isn't a performance. It's a stance." The pause. "And you stood tall." The next morning, the town square bulletin board had a new flyer tacked in bold red letters. Community Safety Council, now forming. Led by students. Guided by citizens. Oversight for all. Open call, chair nominated, Amira Collins. Amira hadn't known they'd do that. She hadn't asked to lead. But maybe that was why it made sense. And Brent? No one saw him again. But his story didn't vanish. It became a cautionary tale, not about disgrace, but about how quickly borrowed power crumbles when it's built on silence and fear. Justice was served. Not with handcuffs. Not with headlines. But with a young black girl standing taller than the man who tried to drown her dignity. A cop lost his badge. A community found its voice. And a girl who just wanted to finish her shift discovered she was built for something far bigger than she ever imagined. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's not caught on tape or broadcast with sirens. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal to be broken, a whisper that says, "You won't get away with this." So what would you have done if you were in Amira's shoes? Can quiet actions be more powerful than loud protests? And how do we protect dignity, not just for ourselves, but for those who can't speak up yet? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters. This story moved you? Subscribe for more true stories that need to be told. Like the video if justice means something more than just the law. Share it with someone who still believes dignity always wins, even if it wins quietly. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes.